Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. My friends and I played Ouija in an Airbnb in South Korea. The spirit warned us to leave before it's too late. So here's the deal. I never thought I'd be one of those people, the kind that ends up writing some wild, creepy experience on Reddit. I'm a pretty normal guy, or at least I was. My name's Alex. I'm 23. And like most people in their early 20s, I spend way too much time scrolling TikTok, watching Netflix, and wasting hours on YouTube. If you've ever been down one of those rabbit holes, you'll know the type of content I'm into. Creepy Reddit stories, analog horror, stuff like that. I thought that kind of stuff was just for fun, you know? Something you laugh about later when the lights are on and everything feels safe. But then, South Korea happened. Let me set the stage. A few months ago, my two best friends, Jenna and Ryan, and I decided to go on this huge trip to South Korea. Jenna is obsessed with K-pop and Korean skincare, and Ryan just wanted an excuse to hit up some crazy clubs in Seoul. Me? I just wanted to eat some authentic Korean BBQ and take it all in. None of us were rich or anything, but we'd been saving up for this trip for over a year, and we managed to snag a pretty cheap Airbnb in a small town a couple of hours outside Seoul. It was one of those old-school hanok houses with sliding wooden doors and paper screens. Super aesthetic, very Instagram-worthy. Jenna was thrilled. She said it looked like something out of a historical K-drama. The first couple of days were amazing. We hit up some famous spots in Seoul, Myeongdong for the shopping, Hongdae for the nightlife, even that Starbucks near Gyeongbokgung Palace that everyone takes pictures of. But by the time we got to the Airbnb, we were ready to chill. It was this quiet little village surrounded by mountains. Peaceful, right? Or at least it was supposed to be. The house itself was weird. Don't get me wrong, it was beautiful. The kind of place influencers would kill for. But there was something about it that fell off. The way the shadows stretched across the floor at sunset. The way the wind rattled the wooden frames just a little too loud at night. It didn't help that the Airbnb host wasn't exactly welcoming. When we arrived, this old guy handed us the keys without saying much, just muttering something in Korean that none of us understood. Jenna, being Jenna, tried to Google translate it, but the app was glitching and she gave up. We figured it was nothing. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The night started out like any other. Music from Ryan's Bluetooth speaker filling the small hanok living room, soft laughter echoing off the wooden walls, and the faint smell of soju and late-night ramen clinging to the air. It was cozy in that low-key way that feels safe. But safe can be deceptive. And looking back now, I think that's what made it worse. The way everything lulled us into a false sense of calm before ripping it away. The weirdness began when Jenna went to use the bathroom. She'd only been gone a few minutes when we heard her shout, "Guys, can someone come here? This is weird." Her voice was shaky, like she wasn't sure if she was freaked out or just overreacting. Ryan rolled his eyes but got up. "Probably a spider," he muttered. "Jenna, it's a spider, isn't it? You're not going to make me kill a spider again, are you?" "No, it's not a spider," she snapped, her voice getting sharper. "Just come here." I followed Ryan, and the two of us found Jenna standing in the tiny bathroom, staring at the mirror. It was one of those old-fashioned, slightly warped mirrors, built into a wooden cabinet. At first, I didn't see what the big deal was, just her reflection, pale and wide-eyed in the dim light. But then Ryan said, "What the hell is that?" That's when I saw it. Written on the mirror, faint but unmistakable, was a word: leave. It wasn't written in lipstick or marker, nothing you could just wipe off. It looked like it had been etched into the glass, like someone had scratched it there with something sharp. The letters were jagged and uneven, and the more I stared at them, the more they looked wrong. Like the angles didn't quite line up with how letters are supposed to look. "Okay," Jenna said, trying to laugh. but it came out shaky. "Which one of you did this? Very funny. You've officially creeped me out. Ha ha." "Jenna, we just got here yesterday," Ryan said, his voice unusually serious. "When would we have done that? And with what? Do you think I carry a glass etching kit in my backpack?" She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the word like it might suddenly start moving. We tried to brush it off. Ryan said it was probably just an old scratch that happened to look like a word, and Jenna agreed because, honestly, she was too freaked out to argue. We went back to the living room and cranked up the music to drown out the weird vibes. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was just letting my imagination get the better of me. But I couldn't shake this feeling, like the air in the house had shifted somehow, heavier, colder. And then, the noises started. At first, it was just little things, the creak of the wooden floorboards, the rustle of paper walls as the wind picked up outside. Old houses make noise. It's part of their charm. But this was different. The sounds were too deliberate, too focused. The first one came from the kitchen. It was a soft tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on the counter. Ryan shouted, "Jenna, knock it off," from the couch, but she was sitting right next to him, scrolling through TikTok with headphones in. "I didn't do anything," she said, pulling one earbud out. "Then what the hell is that?" We all stared at the kitchen. It was dark except for the faint glow of the lanterns. The tapping stopped. For a moment, the silence was suffocating. And then, a crash. We all jumped. It sounded like something heavy had hit the floor. Jenna screamed, and Ryan jumped up, grabbing his phone flashlight. He pointed it into the kitchen, his hand shaking, but there was nothing there. Nothing was out of place. The dishes were stacked neatly, the counters were clean, and the floor was empty. "Okay, this house is officially haunted," Jenna whispered. She was trying to make a joke, but no one laughed. Ryan didn't even lower his flashlight. He was still staring at the floor like he was expecting something to crawl out of the shadows. "Maybe it's the wind," I said, my voice weak. Even I didn't believe it. Ryan turned to me, his face pale. "The wind doesn't make glass break." "Glass?" He pointed at the far corner of the kitchen. There was a small window there, and the glass was spiderwebbed with cracks. The weird thing was, it didn't look like it had been hit from the outside. The cracks were spreading outward, like something had hit it from inside. The Ouija board. This is the part where we should have left, packed our bags, called a cab, and never looked back. But of course we didn't. We were dumb 20-somethings who thought we were invincible, and Jenna wasn't about to leave without pulling out her secret weapon, the Ouija board. "Okay," she said, slamming the box on the coffee table like it was some kind of magic bullet. "If this place is haunted, let's find out what's going on." "Are you insane?" Ryan said. "You want to talk to whatever's out there. What if it's, like, a demon or something?" Jenna rolled her eyes. "It's not a demon, Ryan. Ghosts aren't even real. It's just a stupid board game. But if it makes you feel better, we can ask it how to get rid of the spooky vibes." I didn't want to do it. Every horror story I'd ever heard was screaming at me to just leave it alone. But the way Jenna was looking at me, like she was daring me to chicken out, made me sit down at the table. Ryan reluctantly joined us, muttering under his breath about how stupid this was. We lit a couple of candles and turned off the lanterns. The room felt darker than it should have, like the shadows were pressing in from all sides. Jenna placed the planchette in the center of the board, and we all put our fingers on it. "Okay," she said, her voice overly cheerful. "Is anyone here with us?" For a long moment, nothing happened. The planchette didn't move. The candles flickered, but that was probably just the wind. I was starting to feel stupid for even entertaining this when the planchette twitched under my fingers. Ryan snatched his hand back. "Nope. Nope. I'm out. That's not funny, Jenna." "It wasn't me," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. "Alex, was that you?" I shook my head. My hands were trembling, but I kept them on the planchette. "Let's just see what it says," The planchette started to move again, slowly, like whatever was controlling it was deciding whether to answer. It spelled out, Leave. Okay, great advice, let's go, Ryan said, standing up. Wait, Jenna grabbed his arm. We have to ask why. Why? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. The planchette didn't hesitate this time. It moved faster, more aggressively. Y-O-U-R, pause, L-I-V-E-S. What the hell does that mean? Ryan whispered, his face pale. Before we could figure it out, the board went silent. The candles flickered and went out, plunging us into total darkness. And then, from somewhere deep in the house, we heard a voice, low, guttural, and so quiet we almost didn't hear it. Get out. The words weren't spoken. They were growled. That was when we realized we weren't alone. The night started out like any other. Music from Ryan's Bluetooth speaker filling the small hanok living room. Soft laughter echoing off the wooden walls, and the faint smell of soju and late-night ramen clinging to the air. It was cozy, in that low-key way that feels safe. But safe can be deceptive. And looking back now, I think that's what made it worse. The way everything lulled us into a false sense of calm before ripping it away. The weirdness began when Jenna went to use the bathroom. She'd only been gone a few minutes when we heard her shout, "Guys, can someone come here? This is weird." Her voice was shaky, like she wasn't sure if she was freaked out or just overreacting. Ryan rolled his eyes but got up. "Probably a spider," he muttered. "Jenna, it's a spider, isn't it? You're not going to make me kill a spider again, are you?" "No, it's not a spider," she snapped, her voice getting sharper. "Just come here." I followed Ryan, and the two of us found Jenna standing in the tiny bathroom, staring at the mirror. It was one of those old-fashioned, slightly warped mirrors built into a wooden cabinet. At first, I didn't see what the big deal was. Just her reflection, pale and wide-eyed in the dim light. But then Ryan said, "What the hell is that?" That's when I saw it. Written on the mirror, faint but unmistakable, was a word. Leave. It wasn't written in lipstick or marker, nothing you could just wipe off. It looked like it had been etched into the glass, like someone had scratched it there with something sharp. The letters were jagged and uneven, and the more I stared at them, the more they looked wrong, like the angles didn't quite line up with how letters are supposed to look. "Okay," Jenna said, trying to laugh, but it came out shaky. "Which one of you did this? Very funny, you've officially creeped me out. Ha ha." "Jenna, we just got here yesterday," Ryan said, his voice unusually serious. "When would we have done that? And with what? Do you think I carry a glass etching kit in my backpack?" She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the word like it might suddenly start moving. We tried to brush it off. Ryan said it was probably just an old scratch that happened to look like a word. And Jenna agreed because, honestly, she was too freaked out to argue. We went back to the living room and cranked up the music to drown out the weird vibes. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was just letting my imagination get the better of me, but I couldn't shake this feeling. Like the air in the house had shifted somehow, heavier, colder. And then, the noises started. At first it was just little things, the creak of the wooden floorboards, the rustle of paper walls as the wind picked up outside. Old houses make noise, it's part of their charm. But this was different. The sounds were too deliberate, too focused. The first one came from the kitchen. It was a soft tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on the counter. Ryan shouted, "Jenna, knock it off!" from the couch, but she was sitting right next to him, scrolling through TikTok with headphones in. "I didn't do anything," she said, pulling one earbud out. "Then what the hell is that?" We all stared at the kitchen. It was dark except for the faint glow of the lanterns. The tapping stopped. For a moment, the silence was suffocating. And then, a crash. We all jumped. It sounded like something heavy had hit the floor. Jenna screamed, and Ryan jumped up, grabbing his phone flashlight. He pointed it into the kitchen, his hand shaking, but there was nothing there. Nothing was out of place. The dishes were stacked neatly, The counters were clean, and the floor was empty. "Okay, this house is officially haunted," Jenna whispered. She was trying to make a joke, but no one laughed. Ryan didn't even lower his flashlight. He was still staring at the floor, like he was expecting something to crawl out of the shadows. "Maybe it's the wind," I said, my voice weak. Even I didn't believe it. Ryan turned to me, his face pale. "The wind doesn't make glass break." "Glass?" He pointed at the far corner of the kitchen. There was a small window there, and the glass was spiderwebbed with cracks. The weird thing was, it didn't look like it had been hit from the outside. The cracks were spreading outward, like something had hit it from inside. The Ouija board. This is the part where we should have left. Packed our bags, called a cab, and never looked back. But of course, we didn't. We were dumb 20-somethings who thought we were invincible, and Jenna wasn't about to leave without pulling out her secret weapon, the Ouija board. "Okay," she said, slamming the box on the coffee table like it was some kind of magic bullet. "If this place is haunted, let's find out what's going on." "Are you insane?" Ryan said. "You want to talk to whatever's out there? What if it's like a demon or something?" Jenna rolled her eyes. "It's not a demon, Ryan. Ghosts aren't even real. It's just a stupid board game. But if it makes you feel better, we can ask it how to get rid of the spooky vibes." I didn't want to do it. Every horror story I'd ever heard was screaming at me to just leave it alone. But the way Jenna was looking at me, like she was daring me to chicken out, made me sit down at the table. Ryan reluctantly joined us, muttering under his breath about how stupid this was. We lit a couple of candles and turned off the lanterns. The room felt darker than it should have, like the shadows were pressing in from all sides. Jenna placed the planchette in the center of the board, and we all put our fingers on it. "Okay," she said, her voice overly cheerful. "Is anyone here with us?" For a long moment, nothing happened. The planchette didn't move. The candles flickered, but that was probably just the wind. I was starting to feel stupid for even entertaining this, when the planchette twitched under my fingers. Ryan snatched his hand back. Nope, I'm out. That's not funny, Jenna." "It wasn't me," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. "Alex, was that you?" I shook my head. My hands were trembling, but I kept them on the planchette. "Let's just see what it says." The planchette started to move again, slowly, like whatever was controlling it was deciding whether to answer. It spelled out Leave. "Okay, great advice. Let's go," Ryan said, standing up. "Wait." Jenna grabbed his arm. "We have to ask why." "Why?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. The planchette didn't hesitate this time. It moved faster, more aggressively. YOUR, pause, LIVES. "What the hell does that mean?" Ryan whispered, his face pale. Before we could figure it out, the board went silent. The candles flickered and went out, plunging us into total darkness. And then, from somewhere deep in the house, we heard a voice. Low, guttural, and so quiet we almost didn't hear it. "Get out!" The words weren't spoken. They were growled. That was when we realized we weren't alone. I don't remember moving, but I do remember the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like a drum. Jenna had her phone flashlight on now, her hands trembling so hard the light shook. Ryan was in full panic mode, pacing the living room and muttering under his breath about how we should leave. No one dared to acknowledge the voice we'd all heard, low, guttural, and too close to be real. But the real horror began when we realized the house wasn't quiet anymore. At first it was subtle, scraping sounds coming from somewhere above us, like nails dragging across wood. Then came the faint whispering. It wasn't coming from one direction. It was all around us, shifting from corner to corner, impossible to pin down. It wasn't words, not really. It was more like noises trying to be words, garbled and distorted, like when a radio signal cuts in and out. "What the hell is that?" Ryan whispered, clutching his phone like it was a weapon. "I don't know," Jenna hissed, the light from her phone jittering across the walls as she swung it toward the shadows. Is it the wind? Maybe it's just the... Crash. Something heavy hit the floor in one of the back rooms, hard. It sounded like a piece of furniture being flipped, followed by a dragging noise that made my stomach twist. Okay. Nope. We're leaving, right now, Ryan said, already heading for the door. But when he tried to open it, the handle wouldn't budge. It's stuck! He yelled, yanking on it with both hands. The door didn't move, not an inch. Jenna joined him, her phone flashlight wobbling as she reached for the lock, but it didn't make a difference. It's not locked, she said, her voice shaking. Why isn't it opening? And then we heard it again. The voice. This time, it came from the hallway behind us. Why didn't you listen? There's a thing in the hallway. We spun around so fast Jenna dropped her phone, the flashlight casting wild shadows across the ceiling as it bounced on the wooden floor. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was pitch black. None of us moved. None of us even breathed. Did you hear that? Jenna whispered, as if any of us could have missed it. Ryan was the first to grab Jenna's phone, fumbling with it until the flashlight was steady. He pointed it toward the hallway, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint glint of the wooden floorboards. Then, something moved. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but it wasn't coming from us. It was too tall, its head nearly brushing the low ceiling, and its body was wrong, like it didn't quite fit together. The limbs were too long, the angles too sharp, and its neck twisted in a way that made my stomach churn. And its face, God, I don't even know if you could call it a face. It was more like a smear, like someone had tried to paint a human face but forgot halfway through. Two dark hollows where eyes should have been, a mouth that stretched too wide, the edges curling up like it was smiling. It didn't move like a person. It jerked forward, inch by inch, its limbs bending at unnatural angles as it dragged itself closer. The sound of its joints popping filled the room, loud and wet. Run, Ryan whispered. Run! But none of us moved. We were frozen, trapped between the thing in the hallway and the door that wouldn't open. The thing tilted its head, the smile growing wider, and then it said something I'll never forget. You were warned. Its voice was layered, like multiple people speaking at once, men, women, children, all overlapping in a horrible, chaotic chorus. And then it lunged. The escape that wasn't. Ryan grabbed Jenna and yanked her toward the kitchen. The back door, go! I don't know how we made it there without tripping over each other, but somehow we did. The back door was just as stuck as the front. Ryan threw himself against it, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. Why isn't it opening? Jenna screamed, tears streaming down her face. Move! Ryan yelled, grabbing one of the wooden stools from the counter. He swung it at the door, splinters flying as the stool shattered. The door didn't even have a scratch on it. Behind us, the thing in the hallway was getting closer. I could hear it dragging itself across the floor, the wet pop of its joints echoing louder and louder. And then came the smell, this horrible rancid stench like rotting meat and burned hair. I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve, but it didn't help. Try the window, I shouted, pointing at the cracked glass in the kitchen. Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a frying pan and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, but instead of breaking outward, it collapsed inward like it had been sucked into a void. The frame was empty now, just a gaping black hole where the window used to be, and from that hole, we heard something that made my blood turn to ice. Laughter. Not the kind of laughter you hear when someone tells a joke. This was different, low and guttural, rising and falling like it was mocking us. And then a hand, long, skeletal, and impossibly white, reached out from the darkness, its fingers curling over the edge of the window frame. What we saw in the void. I don't know what possessed Ryan to get close to that thing, but he did. He stepped toward the window, frying pan raised like it would actually do something. I wanted to yell at him to stop, but the words caught in my throat. And then he saw it. Whatever was on the other side of that window wasn't human. It wasn't even a place. It was a void. a churning black emptiness filled with shapes I couldn't describe. They moved like smoke, but glistened like oil, twisting and writhing in ways that hurt my eyes to look at. And in the center of it all was a face. Or maybe it was a mask. It was too far away to tell, but it had the same hollow eyes and stretched smile as the thing in the hallway. Ryan screamed, a sound so raw and primal it barely sounded human. He dropped the frying pan and stumbled back, clutching his head like it was going to explode. "What is it?" Jenna yelled, grabbing his arm. Ryan didn't answer. He just kept screaming, his eyes wide and unfocused, blood streaming from his nose. And then he collapsed. The last room. We dragged Ryan into the last room we hadn't checked. The tiny bedroom at the end of the hall. Jenna locked the door behind us. Not that it would have done any good. Ryan was still unconscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. "We're gonna die here," Jenna whispered, rocking back and forth on the floor. "We're gonna die." "No, we're not," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But even I didn't believe it. The whispers were louder now, pressing in from all sides. I could feel them crawling into my ears, seeping into my brain. They weren't just noises anymore. They were words. Words I didn't understand but somehow knew. They were promises, threats, invitations. And then the door started to rattle. It didn't open. It just shook, violently, like something was pounding against it from the other side. But she just stared at me, her eyes hollow, like she'd seen something no human should ever see. "Where's Ryan?" I repeated, louder this time, dragging myself to my feet. My body ached like I'd been hit by a truck, every muscle screaming in protest. But I didn't care. I needed to find him. Jenna shook her head, still trembling. "He's gone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Alex, he's gone." "Gone where?" I snapped, my panic boiling over into anger. "What the hell are you talking about?" Her eyes flicked toward the house, the hanok standing silent and empty in the soft morning light. The house. It took him. What we found. I don't know what I was expecting, but when I turned to look at the house, it didn't seem any different. It was just a house. The same weathered wooden beams, the same paper windows, the same stupid little garden out front. It didn't look like a place that could eat someone alive, but I knew better. I could still feel it, the oppressive weight, the crawling sensation under my skin, like the house was watching us, like it was waiting. "We have to go back in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Ryan might still be—" "No!" Jenna cut me off, her voice rising in panic. "No, Alex, we can't. We can't go back in there." I grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "We can't just leave him, Jenna. What if he's hurt? What if he's trapped in there?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to slap me. But then she said, "He's not trapped. He's gone. The house doesn't let people go, Alex. It let us go. Why would it do that? Why would it let us leave and not him?" I didn't have an answer. I didn't want to have an answer. So I ignored her and started toward the house. The inside was different. The front door was open. It hadn't been before, but now it stood there, slightly ajar, like an invitation or a trap. "Alex, don't!" Jenna begged, but I was already stepping inside. The air was colder than it should have been, and the light from outside barely penetrated the shadows. The house smelled wrong, like damp earth and mildew, but with an undercurrent of something metallic, something sharp. Blood, maybe. The living room was empty. The broken Ouija board was gone, as if it had never been there. The kitchen was the same, silent, untouched. The shattered window repaired like nothing had ever happened. But it didn't feel the same. It felt bigger, like the house was stretching, twisting itself around me, the walls shifting just out of the corner of my eye. "Ryan!" I called, my voice echoing in a way it shouldn't have. The house wasn't big enough for echoes, but somehow my voice came back to me, warped and wrong. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to turn around and never look back. But I couldn't. Not without him. The blood trail. I found the first sign of him in the hallway, a smear of blood, faint but unmistakable, stretched across the floorboards. My stomach dropped. "Ryan!" I shouted, louder this time, my voice cracking. No response. The blood led me to one of the bedrooms, the same one we'd hidden in the night before. The door was closed, but there was more blood on the handle. My hands were shaking as I reached for it, half expecting the thing from the hallway to lunge at me the moment I turned the knob. But nothing happened. The door swung open easily. The room was empty. No furniture, no bed. Just 4 bare walls and a single window that didn't look out into the garden. Instead, it looked into darkness, an endless void, the same one I'd seen through the kitchen window. And in the center of the room, etched into the floor in deep, jagged scratches, was a single word. Stay. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding. I could feel something behind me, something cold and heavy, breathing down my neck. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. Still, the feeling didn't go away. It clung to me, digging into my skin, pressing into my chest. I stumbled back into the living room, my head spinning. And that's when I saw him. The thing that was Ryan. At first, I thought it was Ryan. He was standing in the corner, his back to me, his head tilted at an odd angle. "Ryan!" I shouted, relief flooding through me. I ran toward him, reaching out to grab his shoulder. But when he turned around, I froze. It wasn't Ryan. It looked like him. Same clothes, same height, same face. But his eyes were gone, replaced by those same dark, hollow pits I'd seen on the thing in the hallway. And his mouth stretched too wide, splitting his cheeks like his skin couldn't contain it. Blood dripped from the corners, staining his shirt. "Alex," it said, its voice layered and wrong. "You shouldn't have come back." I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. What the hell is this? What's happening?" The thing tilted its head, its smile widening. "We warned you," it said. "We warned you to leave." "Where's Ryan?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What did you do to him?" It laughed. The sound was horrible, like bones snapping and glass breaking all at once. "He's here," it said. "He's with us now." "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "No, you're lying." It took a step toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural. "You can join him, if you'd like. Stay with us, Alex. Stay forever." I didn't wait to find out what it meant. I turned and ran, sprinting for the front door. The house groaned around me, the walls closing in, the shadows reaching for me. But I didn't stop. I burst through the door and into the sunlight, collapsing onto the dirt. Jenna was still there, her face pale and drawn. She helped me up, her hands cold and trembling. "Where's Ryan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't answer. I couldn't even look at her. Behind us, the door to the hanok creaked shut, the sound echoing in the still morning air. And for just a moment, I thought I saw a shadow in the window, a tall, twisted figure, watching us, smiling. The warning. We didn't talk about what happened on the ride back to Seoul. Jenna cried the entire way, silent tears streaming down her face as she stared out the window. I just sat there, numb, staring at my hands. They were shaking, and I couldn't stop them. We reported the Airbnb to the authorities, but when they went to investigate, the house wasn't there. The entire property was gone, replaced by an overgrown field of weeds and dirt. They didn't believe us, of course. Why would they? But sometimes, late at night, I think I hear Ryan's voice. Faint and distorted, like it's coming from far away. And I can still feel the house, its cold, heavy presence lingering just out of reach. Watching, waiting. And in those moments, I remember the word scratched into the floor. Stay. I think the house wanted us to stay. But not all of us. Only one. You'd think getting out of that house would have brought relief. Like, okay, it's over now, right? We survived. But the thing is, some doors, once opened, can't be closed. And some places, they don't just stay in your memories. They follow you. The first night back, Jenna and I checked into a budget hotel in Seoul that night. Neither of us had the energy to say much. We just handed over our passports at the front desk, shuffled up to our room, and collapsed onto the beds. It should have been comforting, being surrounded by normal things, fluorescent lights, clean sheets, the faint hum of traffic outside. But it wasn't. Not even close. Jenna fell asleep first, though I don't know how. I could hear her breathing slow and steady in the bed next to mine, her face turned toward the wall. I tried to do the same, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing. Ryan, or whatever it was. His hollow eyes, that horrible, too wide smile. I was lying there, staring at the ceiling when I heard it. A faint scraping sound, coming from somewhere inside the room. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I sat up, rubbing my face, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the sound came again, soft, deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. Except there was no wood in the room, only the cheap carpet beneath the beds and the plaster walls. "Jenna," I whispered, my voice shaking. She didn't move. "Jenna, wake up." She didn't respond. That's when I noticed her breathing wasn't steady anymore. It was shallow and uneven, like she was struggling. I leaned over to shake her shoulder, but when she turned toward me, my blood went cold. Her eyes were open, but they weren't her eyes. They were black, bottomless pits, staring straight through me. Her mouth twitched, pulling into a smile that stretched too far, her lips cracking at the edges. "Why didn't you stay?" she whispered, her voice layered and wrong. I scrambled backward, falling off the bed. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might stop. But when I looked back, she was normal. Jenna asleep, her breathing slow and steady again. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even close my eyes. The disappearance. The next morning, Jenna was gone. I woke up to the sound of the hotel cleaning staff knocking on the door. The other bed was empty, the sheets rumpled like she'd just gotten up to use the bathroom. But her bag was still there. Her phone was still charging on the nightstand. She wouldn't have left without her stuff. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked the hallway, called her name, even knocked on a few of the other doors. Nothing. It was like she'd just vanished. I went to the front desk, frantic, trying to explain what had happened. The clerk was polite but unhelpful. "Maybe she went out for a walk," they suggested, their tone dismissive. "It happens." "No," I snapped. "She wouldn't just leave. She's missing." They offered to call the police, but what was I supposed to tell them? That my friend had been swallowed by the same house that took Ryan? That she'd turned into something else in the middle of the night, only to disappear by morning? They'd think I was insane. Hell, I was starting to think I was insane. But I wasn't. The messages. I stayed in Seoul for 2 more days, hoping Jenna would turn up. I filed a missing persons report, but the cops didn't take me seriously. They said she probably went back home without telling me, or decided to stay with someone she met. I knew better. On the second night, I got a message. It came from Jenna's phone. At first, I felt a surge of relief. She was alive. She'd just run off somewhere and forgotten to tell me. But when I opened the message, my relief turned to dread. It was a picture. The photo was blurry, like it had been taken in motion, but I recognized the background immediately. It was the Hanok house, the sliding wooden doors, the lanterns, the same damn kitchen window that had shattered. And in the foreground was Jenna, or something that looked like her. Her face was turned toward the camera, her eyes black, her mouth twisted into that impossible smile. Below the picture was a single word: stay. I dropped my phone like it was burning me. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even pick it up again. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even turn off the lights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. That smile. That word. The truth about the house. I went back to the hanok. I know how stupid that sounds, but I didn't have a choice. I couldn't just leave her there. Or Ryan. I had to know what happened to them. When I got to the village, it was almost unrecognizable. The streets were deserted, the shops boarded up, the air heavy with silence. It was like the place had been abandoned overnight. I found the spot where the house should have been, but it wasn't there anymore. Just an empty field, overgrown with weeds. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where I knew the house had been. I could still feel it, its presence, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on me. And then I heard it. A voice. Faint, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. Alex. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the wind rustling through the weeds. But the voice came again, louder this time. Alex. Stay. And then I saw it. In the field, just beyond the tree line, was the house. It wasn't supposed to be there, but it was. The same wooden beams, the same paper windows, the same open door. The final warning. I don't remember walking toward the house, but somehow I was standing in front of it again. The door was open, dark and inviting, the smell of damp earth and rotting meat wafting out. I should have run. I should have turned around and never looked back. But I didn't. I stepped inside. The house was empty, silent. The air was so thick it felt like I was breathing through a wet cloth. The walls seemed closer now, the shadows darker, the space bending in ways that didn't make sense. I called out their names, Ryan, Jenna, but the only response was the sound of my own voice echoing back at me. And then I saw them. Ryan and Jenna standing in the hallway. Their faces were blank, their eyes black voids, their mouths stretched into those horrible smiles. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there, watching me. Alex, Ryan said, finally, his voice distorted and wrong. You should have stayed. The walls began to close in, the shadows reaching for me, pulling at my clothes, my skin. I tried to run, but the house wouldn't let me go. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating through my chest like a gunshot. And then, everything went dark. The aftermath. I don't know how I got out. I woke up in a hospital in Seoul, my body covered in cuts and bruises, my clothes torn and filthy. The doctors said I'd been found wandering near a construction site, muttering to myself, half conscious. They didn't know how I got there, and I couldn't explain it. Jenna and Ryan were never found. The police said there was no record of the hanok house ever existing, no Airbnb listing, no host. It was like the entire thing had been erased. But I know it's still out there. I can feel it. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispers, faint and distorted, coming from the corners of my room. And when I look in the mirror, I swear I see them. Ryan and Jenna, standing just behind me, smiling. They're waiting, and the worst part, I think the house is too. My sister and I played Ouija on New Year's Eve. The spirit said, "Your year ends tonight." Alright, so let me preface this by saying I'm not usually the type of person who believes in ghosts or spirits, or any of that paranormal stuff. I mean, yeah, I've watched all the scary movies, The Conjuring, Insidious, and even some of those weird analog horror YouTube videos that pop up in your recommended feed late at night. But it's just entertainment, you know? Nothing real. At least, that's what I told myself before last New Year's Eve. before I played that stupid Ouija board with my sister. A little backstory. My sister Mia is 2 years younger than me, and she's always been into the spooky stuff. Paranormal documentaries, conspiracy theories, you name it. She's that friend who always wants to check out the haunted house or do a midnight cemetery walk just for fun. Meanwhile, I've always been the more grounded one. I'd roll my eyes when she talked about shadow people or hearing weird knocks at night. But hey, it's New Year's Eve and we're stuck at home because, let's be honest, adulting is expensive. No big parties, no flashy trips to Times Square, just us, some leftover pizza, and the countdown playing in the background on TikTok Live. The night started off chill. We ordered from McDonald's because the drive-thru was still open late, bless them. And we settled in to watch some cheesy horror movies on Netflix. At around 11:30, Mia suddenly got this look in her eyes, the kind of look that usually meant she was about to suggest something stupid. Sure enough, she pulled out this old, beat-up Ouija board from her closet. The thing looked ancient, like it was made in the 1800s or something, but she swore she'd bought it off Amazon for $10. "Let's just try it," she said, setting the board down on the living room coffee table. I laughed it off at first, telling her it was lame and cliché, but she kept pushing. "Come on, it's New Year's Eve. What better way to ring in the new year than talking to some spirits?" Now, I wasn't entirely sold, but I figured, whatever, it's harmless. Plus, I was kind of curious to see how far she'd take it. So, I agreed. We dimmed the lights because, obviously, ambiance is everything. Mia lit a couple of those overpriced candles she got from Bath and Body Works, the ones that smelled like cinnamon and Christmas trees. Honestly, it felt more festive than scary. We set up the board between us, and she gave me this super serious spiel about respecting the spirits and not taking it as a joke. I couldn't help but snicker, which earned me a glare. We placed our fingers lightly on the planchette, and she started the whole, "Is anyone there?" routine. Nothing happened at first, and I could feel the boredom creeping in. But then, and I swear I'm not making this up, the planchette moved, like it legit slid across the board. I yanked my hands back immediately. "Okay, very funny, Mia," I said, accusing her of pushing it. She swore up and down that she hadn't. I wanted to call BS, but the look on her face was different. She seemed spooked, like she wasn't expecting it to work either. I hesitated, but I put my hands back on the planchette. We asked again. "Who are we talking to?" The planchette spelled out 3 letters. J-A-C. "Jack? Is that your name?" Mia asked, her voice trembling slightly. The planchette moved to yes. "Okay, Jack," I said, feeling a weird mix of curiosity and unease. "What do you want?" This time it spelled out YOURYEARENDSTONIGHT. I froze. Mia froze. We both stared at each other, wide-eyed, like, what the hell does that even mean? I wanted to laugh it off, but there was something about the way the planchette had moved. Quick, deliberate, like someone was really pushing it. And not Mia, because I could feel her hands trembling under mine. "All right, I'm done," I said, pulling my hands away. "This is getting too weird." But Mia wasn't done. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jack, what do you mean by that?" The planchette didn't move this time. Instead, there was this loud, abrupt knock at the front door. 3 knocks, to be exact. Our heads snapped toward the door. It was almost midnight, and we weren't expecting anyone. We live in a pretty quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone's either asleep or out at some bar by now. I grabbed my phone and checked our Ring camera app to see who was there. The screen showed nothing, just the empty porch, lit by the faint glow of our holiday lights. I could feel my chest tightening. Mia looked at me, her face pale. "Maybe it was just the wind," I said, trying to sound calm, even though I didn't believe it myself. But before I could even put my phone down, we heard it again. This time, it wasn't at the door. It was coming from the window. 3 sharp taps on the glass. We both screamed. I'm not even going to lie about it. I've never felt that kind of fear before. Mia grabbed my arm, and we bolted out of the living room, locking ourselves in my bedroom upstairs. I could still hear the tapping, like whatever it was had followed us around the house. It didn't stop until the clock struck midnight, when the distant sound of fireworks drowned it out. We stayed up the rest of the night, huddled together with the lights on, jumping at every little sound. When the sun finally came up, we checked the house. Nothing was out of place. No signs of anyone at the door or the window. But when we looked at the Ouija board, the planchette was gone. Just gone. We didn't talk about it much after that, but every so often, I'll catch Mia looking over her shoulder like she's expecting something. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear those same 3 knocks. I thought that was the end of it. But then, weird stuff started happening. Stuff I can't explain. And now I'm not so sure we walked away from that night alone. But I'll save that for part 2. If you're still reading, let me know if you've ever had anything like this happen, because honestly, I don't think I can deal with this on my own. Okay, so if you read part 1, you already know how weird New Year's Eve was for me and my sister Mia. But trust me, what happened after that makes the Ouija board look like a harmless board game. And no, this isn't one of those stories where everything just goes back to normal and we all laugh it off. If only. Things got darker, scarier, and way more personal. The day after New Year's, Mia was jumpy, like really jumpy. She kept checking her phone, the windows, and even the back door, like she was expecting someone to pop out at any moment. I chalked it up to paranoia from the whole Ouija thing. I mean, it's not every day you get told by a spirit that your year ends tonight. But I figured she'd calm down once she had some time to process everything. Spoiler, she didn't. On January 2nd, Mia came into my room around midnight. She looked pale, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hands were shaking, and she kept looking over her shoulder like someone had followed her. "I've been hearing the knocks again," she whispered. My first instinct was to brush her off. I mean, come on. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Knocking could mean anything. Wind, neighbors, some stray cat messing with our siding. But then she showed me her phone. She'd set up a motion-activated camera in her room, one of those cheap ones she got off Amazon. The footage was grainy, but it was clear enough to see the door to her closet slowly creak open on its own. No draft, no one else in the room, just the door, moving like someone was on the other side. A shadow flickered across the screen, but it didn't look human. It was too tall, too narrow, like someone had stretched a person out and flattened them into a dark smear. And then came the sound. 3 knocks, clear as day, on her closet door. "Okay," I said, trying to stay calm for her sake. "This is just a glitch or something. Maybe the camera's buggy." Mia didn't buy it. "This isn't normal, Luke," she snapped. "It's the same thing we heard on New Year's Eve. It's following us." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was overreacting, but the truth was, I'd started hearing the knocks too. It wasn't loud or frequent, just 3 soft raps on my bedroom wall at night. At first I thought it was the pipes or something, but it always came at the same time, 3:00 a.m. And it wasn't random. It was deliberate, like whoever, or whatever, was doing it wanted me to know they were there. A few nights later, things escalated. I was scrolling through Instagram trying to distract myself, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mia. "Come downstairs. Now." I rolled my eyes, thinking it was just another one of her panic attacks. But when I got to the living room, I found her standing by the front door, holding a kitchen knife. Her face was drenched in sweat, and she was staring at the Ring camera monitor on her phone like it had just told her the worst news of her life. "What's going on?" I asked, trying not to sound freaked out. She handed me her phone. The live feed from the Ring camera showed a figure standing on our porch. Not moving, not knocking, just standing there. It was wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled up, so we couldn't see its face. But what made my stomach drop was the way it was positioned, perfectly still, facing the camera, like it knew we were watching. And then I noticed its hands. They were covered in blood. I don't know what came over me, but I threw open the door, ready to confront whoever it was. But the porch was empty. No footsteps in the snow, no sign that anyone had been there. I turned back to Mia, who was still glued to her phone. The figure was still on the screen, standing there, even though I was looking at an empty porch with my own eyes. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just some creepy prank. We didn't sleep that night. Mia wanted to call the cops, but what were we supposed to say? "Hi, there's a ghost or demon or something stalking us through our Ring camera?" Yeah, that would have gone over well. Instead, we decided to stay together in the living room with every light in the house turned on. But the lights didn't help. At around 3:15 a.m., the knocking started again. This time, it wasn't just on the walls, it was coming from inside the house. We grabbed whatever we could find, knives, a baseball bat, even the fire poker from the fireplace, and started checking every room. Nothing, but the knocking followed us, moving from room to room, always just one step ahead or behind. It didn't stop until sunrise. The next day, Mia decided to stay with a friend for a while. I didn't blame her. Honestly, I wanted to leave too, but I couldn't shake the feeling that running wouldn't help. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't tied to the house. It was tied to us, and I was right. A week later, Mia called me in tears. She'd been staying at her friend's apartment in downtown Chicago, one of those high-rise buildings with fancy security and keycard access. She thought she'd be safe there, but the knocks followed her. First on the walls, then on the window of her 12th floor bedroom. And the worst part, her friend heard them too. That's when we realized we needed help. Mia reached out to some paranormal forum on Reddit, posting about our experience under a throwaway account. The replies were unsettling. Most people thought it was fake, just some dumb creepypasta. But one user, someone with a username like Whispered Warning 88, messaged her directly. Their message was short, but it sent chills down my spine. It's not a spirit. It's something worse. Don't listen to the knocks. Don't open the door. And whatever you do, don't ask it questions. Mia showed me the message, her hands trembling. "What the hell does that mean?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. Later that night, I was alone in the house, trying to convince myself it was all just some elaborate prank or a shared hallucination. But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mia's number. "Let me in." I froze. My heart was pounding as I typed back, "What?" She replied instantly, "I'm outside. Open the door." But here's the thing. Mia wasn't outside. I knew she wasn't, because she texted me earlier saying she was staying with her friend again. Still, I couldn't stop myself. I walked to the front door, my fingers shaking as I reached for the handle. But just before I opened it, I checked the Ring camera feed, and there she was. Or at least, something that looked like her. Same face, same clothes. But her eyes were wrong. They were completely black, like two pits of endless nothing. She stared directly into the camera, her mouth twitching into a smile that was too wide, too unnatural. The knocks came again, 3 sharp raps on the door, and then her voice, Mia's voice, called out, muffled but clear. "Let me in, Luke. It's cold out here." I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at the feed. But I didn't open the door. I didn't say a word. I just backed away and locked myself in my room, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The next morning, I called Mia. She picked up on the second ring, groggy but alive. She'd been at her friend's place the whole night, just like she said she would be. I haven't told her about the knock since then, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever's outside isn't going to stop until one of us answers. Or worse, until one of us lets it in. And that's not even the scariest part, because last night, for the first time, the knocks came from inside my closet. Stay tuned for part 3. If anyone's dealt with something like this, please Tell me what to do, because I think it's getting closer. You know that feeling when you wake up in the middle of the night and everything is so quiet, so still, that your own breathing feels too loud? That's where I was when the knocks came from inside my closet. 3 slow, deliberate raps, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side wanted me to know it was there. And trust me, it knew I was awake. I didn't move at first. My brain was stuck in this fog of terror, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe it was just the house settling, or maybe something fell off the shelf. I was grasping at straws, but deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't the house. This was it. I stayed completely still, lying there in the dark, my eyes locked on the closet door. It wasn't fully closed. There was a tiny sliver of a gap, just enough to see the blackness inside. I don't know why I didn't grab my phone or call someone. Mia, the cops, anyone. But I couldn't. I was frozen, like a deer caught in headlights, waiting for whatever was about to happen. Then, the door creaked open. Just a little. Just enough for me to see it. There was something inside. At first, it looked like a shadow, but the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't just darkness. It had form. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its limbs were too long, too thin, bending at unnatural angles. But the worst part was its face, if you could even call it that. There were no eyes, no mouth, just a featureless void where its face should have been. And yet, I knew it was looking at me. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me staring at it, and it staring back. But then it moved. Slowly, its head tilted to one side, like it was curious, like it was studying me. And then, in a voice that wasn't a voice, it was more like a sound that rattled inside my skull. It said, "Let me in." My body acted before my brain could catch up. I bolted out of bed, sprinting down the hall to the bathroom. I locked the door behind me and curled up in the corner, shaking so hard I thought I might throw up. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually, the first rays of sunlight started creeping through the bathroom window. Only then did I feel brave enough to leave. The closet door was closed when I went back into my room. There was no sign of anything out of place, no shadow, no scratches, no blood, just my room, looking as normal as ever. But it wasn't normal. It would never be normal again. Mia called me later that day. She sounded frantic, her words coming out in a jumbled mess. "It's not just the knocks," she said. "It's Luke. It's watching me." I pressed her for details, and what she told me made my blood run cold. She'd gone out the night before with her friend, just a normal girls' night, nothing crazy. They hit up a Starbucks downtown, then went to see some random rom-com at the movie theater. But when they left, Mia noticed someone following them. "It was him," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the phone. "The man from the porch, the one with the hoodie." She said he kept his distance at first, staying just far enough behind that she couldn't make out his face. But every time she glanced over her shoulder, he was there, watching, following. She told her friend, but when they looked again, he was gone. I wanted to tell her it was just paranoia, that she was imagining things, but then she sent me a photo. It was from her phone, taken during the movie. She'd been messing around with Snapchat filters, trying to kill time while waiting for the previews to end. In the picture, you can see her and her friend laughing, making goofy faces. But in the background, just behind their seats, there's a man in a hoodie. He's not looking at the screen, not laughing, not eating popcorn. He's staring directly at Mia's phone, at her. "Luke, I didn't see him there when I took the picture," she said. "He wasn't there. I swear to God he wasn't there. I didn't know what to say. I mean, what do you even say to something like that? It's fine. Don't worry about it." No, this was far from fine. That night, I decided to set up cameras around the house. I don't know what I was expecting to catch. Maybe I just wanted proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I set one up in the living room, one in the hallway, and one in my bedroom, all synced to an app on my phone. The first few hours were uneventful. Just me pacing around, checking the locks for the 100th time. I must have fallen asleep at some point because the next thing I remember is waking up to my phone buzzing. Motion detected in the living room. I opened the app, half expecting it to be a glitch. But it wasn't. The camera showed the living room, empty except for the faint glow of the TV I'd left on. And then, slowly, something moved into frame. It was the man in the hoodie. Except it wasn't a man. Not really. The figure moved with this strange, jerky motion, like a puppet on strings. Its head twitched unnaturally, snapping from side to side as it walked toward the camera. And then, it stopped, standing perfectly still in the middle of the room. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, without warning, its head snapped toward the camera, and it spoke. "Let me in!" The voice wasn't human. It was this guttural, distorted sound, like metal scraping against metal. And the worst part? It wasn't coming from the video. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, expecting to see, I don't even know what. But there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway, stretching out in both directions. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. When I looked back at my phone, the figure was gone. The camera feed showed the living room, empty again. Mia called me the next morning. She sounded worse than ever, her voice cracking with fear. "It's in my dreams now," she said. "Every time I close my eyes, it's there, watching me, waiting." I tried to comfort her, but honestly, I didn't have any answers. I didn't know what to do or how to stop it. All I knew was that it was getting closer and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. And then she dropped the bombshell. "Luke," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think it's not just following us. I think it's inside us." "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat dry. "I mean, I think it's using us. Every time I see it, every time I hear the knocks, it feels like it's taking something, like it's pulling me apart, piece by piece." I didn't know what to say. All I knew was that she was right. I could feel it too. This heaviness, this darkness growing inside me. And the worst part? I think it's feeding on us, feeding on our fear, our pain, our lives. The knocks haven't stopped. They're louder now, more insistent. They come from every corner of the house, echoing through the walls, the floors, the ceiling. And every night, I see it. In the shadows, in the mirrors, in the corner of my eye. It's always there, waiting. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I don't know if Mia and I can survive whatever this is, but I do know one thing. It won't stop until it gets what it wants. And I'm starting to think it's not just after us, it's after you too. Stay tuned for part 4. If you've made it this far, be careful. Because once you've seen it, once you've heard it, it knows. And it won't stop until it's inside. By now, I've realized the rules of this thing. It doesn't care about locks or doors or cameras. It doesn't care about where we run or how far we go. It doesn't just follow you. It lives inside the cracks of your life, slipping into every shadow and every silence. And once it's in, it doesn't leave. It waits. And it's waiting for something I can feel but can't explain. After Mia's call about it being inside us, things went from terrifying to wrong. It's hard to explain, but everything about the house felt off. The air was heavier, the shadows longer. Even the smallest sounds, like the fridge humming or the creak of a floorboard, felt like they were part of something bigger, something watching, something alive. That night, I was sitting on the couch, trying to drown out the anxiety with YouTube videos. Funny compilations, memes, anything to take my mind off the fact that my sister and I were being hunted by something I couldn't even name. But then, the Wi-Fi cut out. My phone wouldn't load anything, the smart TV froze, and the lights dimmed just slightly, not enough to go out completely, just enough to feel like the house itself was breathing. I tried to convince myself it was a power issue, maybe the weather or something. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a glitch. This was it. Testing the boundaries, seeing how far it could go. The first sign was the tapping. It wasn't the usual 3 knocks. This time, it was everywhere at once. Rapid, scattered, like a dozen hands slapping against the walls. The sound filled the room, coming from the ceiling, the floor, even the inside of the TV screen. I froze, clutching the edge of the couch, my heart racing so fast it felt like it might stop. Then it spoke. Not out loud. Oh no, that would have been too normal. It spoke through the sound of the tapping itself. The rhythm became a voice, like Morse code translated directly into my brain. The words weren't clear at first, just fragments of sound and feeling. But the longer I listened, the clearer it got. "You're already mine," I bolted up, grabbing the baseball bat I'd started keeping by the couch. I don't know what I thought I was going to do with it. Fight the walls? Swing at the shadows? But having it in my hands made me feel just a little less helpless. I shouted at the empty room, "What do you want?" My voice cracked, more fear than anger. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat, thundering in my ears. And then the lights went out, pitch black. My first instinct was to run, but where? The front door? The upstairs bedroom? Every part of the house felt like a trap. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight, and that's when I saw it. The figure. It was standing in the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, but I knew it was there. The same twisted limbs, the same featureless face, except now its head was tilted at an even sharper angle, like it was mocking me. It didn't move, it just stood there, its presence so overwhelming I could barely breathe. And then, slowly, it raised a hand. Its fingers were impossibly long, too thin to be human, and they pointed toward the hallway, toward the stairs. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "No, I'm not playing this game." But the thing didn't care. Its hand remained raised, pointing, until the tapping started again, this time louder, violent. The walls shook with the force of it, like they were about to collapse, and I realized it wasn't going to stop until I listened. I took a shaky step toward the hallway, then another. The tapping grew quieter, almost encouraging, like it was rewarding me for obeying. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated. The second floor was completely dark, and I could feel something waiting for me at the top. Not see it, feel it. A presence, heavy and suffocating, like the air itself was alive. "Luke," a voice whispered. It sounded like Mia, but I knew it wasn't her. She wasn't here. I'd called her earlier, and she'd promised she was staying at her friend's place, far away from all this. But the voice was so convincing, so familiar, that for a moment I believed it. "Mia?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Help me," the voice said, coming from the top of the stairs. It was so quiet, so broken, like she was barely holding on. But there was something else underneath it, something wrong. A distortion, like a second voice hidden inside the first. I gripped the baseball bat tighter, forcing myself to climb the stairs. My feet felt like lead, every step heavier than the last. The hallway at the top was empty, the doors to all the rooms wide open, except one. My bedroom door was closed, and the knocking was coming from inside. I don't know what possessed me to open the door. Maybe it was the hope, the desperate belief that somehow Mia was inside, that this was all some nightmare I could wake up from. Or maybe it was the thing itself, pulling me closer, manipulating me. Either way, I opened it. The room was empty. At least, that's what I thought at first. But then I saw the mirror. My full-length mirror, the one propped up against the far wall, was wrong. The reflection didn't match the room. It was darker, twisted, like it was showing a version of my room from some other reality. And in the center of the reflection, I saw it. The figure wasn't standing anymore. It was crawling, its limbs bending in ways that made my stomach churn. It moved closer and closer to the surface of the mirror, its faceless head tilting from side to side like it was examining me. And then it stopped, pressing one of its hands against the glass. The surface rippled like water. "Let me in," it said again. this time louder, more insistent. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. The mirror began to shake, the rippling spreading outward like cracks in the surface of reality. I wanted to run, to get as far away from the house as possible, but my feet wouldn't move. The thing in the mirror pressed harder, its hand sinking into the glass. And I realized it wasn't just in the mirror. It was coming through. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no, no." The hand broke through the surface. Then the arm. Then the head. Its featureless face turned toward me, and for the first time, I could feel its eyes. It didn't have any, but I could feel them, burning into me, seeing every part of me, every fear, every weakness. And then it smiled. It didn't have a mouth, but it smiled. I don't know how to explain it. It was like the entire room twisted into the shape of a grin that stretched wider and wider until it swallowed everything. I don't remember much after that, just the sound of breaking glass, the tapping turning into a deafening roar, and then nothing. I woke up the next morning on the floor of my room. The mirror was shattered, pieces of glass scattered everywhere, but there was no sign of it, no handprints, no shadow, nothing. Just me, alone in the silence. But it wasn't over. I could feel it deep inside me, like a splinter in my mind. It wasn't gone, it had just gone deeper. Mia called me later that day. She didn't say much, just one sentence before hanging up. "They're inside the walls now." And I think she's right. I can hear them, scratching, tapping, whispering. They're everywhere. And I think they're getting ready for something. I don't know if I'll survive long enough to figure out what it is. But if I don't, I need you to understand this. Once you hear the knocks, once you see it, you can't escape. It doesn't just follow you, it becomes you. I don't even know how to start this part. I'm writing it because I have to. Because if I don't, this thing will win. And I can't let that happen. It's not just about me or Mia anymore. This, whatever it is, it's bigger than us. And it doesn't stop. It doesn't end. It just finds more cracks, more ways in. The knocking hasn't stopped. It's everywhere now. On the walls, under the floor, even in the air, like it's knocking on reality itself. And it's louder, more demanding. Like it knows I'm running out of time. And maybe I am. 2 nights ago, I made a mistake. I was sitting in my car, parked outside the house because I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. I was shaking, sweating, clutching the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me alive. My phone buzzed, and it was a text from Mia. She'd sent me a video. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct in me screamed not to, but I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't leave her hanging. The video started with Mia's face, pale and drawn, her eyes darting around like she was afraid something was about to jump out at her. "It's getting worse," she whispered. I can't fight it anymore, Luke. I don't think we're supposed to. I think we're supposed to." Her voice trailed off, and her head snapped to the side, like she'd heard something. Then she turned back to the camera, her face calm, too calm. "Let it in." The video cut to static for a moment, and when it came back, the screen was dark. I could barely make out her silhouette standing in a doorway. Her bedroom, I think. She was holding something in her hand, something small and sharp. A knife. "Mia, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted into my phone, as if she could hear me through the screen. But she didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the wall, raising the knife, and started carving something into the plaster. The camera zoomed in, though I don't know how. It was like the phone had a mind of its own. The letters were jagged, uneven, but clear. "Let me in." The video ended abruptly, and my phone screen went black. I tried calling her again and again, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I decided to go to her friend's apartment. The building was eerily quiet when I arrived, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, like the world's holding its breath. I knocked on the door to her friend's unit and it swung open on its own. Inside, the lights were off and the air felt wrong, thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. "Mia?" I called out, stepping inside. My voice echoed back to me, distorted, like the apartment itself was mocking me. There was no response, just the faint sound of scratching coming from the hallway. I followed the noise, my hands trembling. The hallway stretched out longer than it should have, the walls narrowing, the shadows twisting into shapes that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. At the end of the hall was a single door, slightly ajar. The scratching was louder now, rhythmic, deliberate. I pushed the door open, and there she was. Mia was sitting in the middle of the room, her back to me, surrounded by the same words she'd carved into the walls of her room. "Let me in." They were everywhere, on the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. She was still holding the knife, dragging it across her arm in slow, deliberate movements, carving the same phrase into her skin. "Mia!" I shouted, running toward her. She didn't flinch, didn't react at all, like she couldn't hear me. When I grabbed her shoulder, she finally turned around, and my stomach dropped. Her eyes were gone. In their place were two black voids, endless and hollow, staring straight through me. Her mouth moved, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. "It's too late," it said. "You're already inside." I don't remember how I got out of the apartment. The next thing I knew, I was back in my car, speeding down the highway with no destination in mind. My hands were covered in blood. Not mine, not hers, just blood. I don't even know if it's real. I don't know what's real anymore. When I finally pulled over, I checked my phone. There was a new video in my gallery, one I didn't remember recording. My hand shook as I opened it. It was me, sitting in my car, staring at the camera with the same black voids for eyes. And I was smiling. The me in the video leaned closer to the camera and whispered, "Let me in." Last night, I tried to barricade myself in the house. I boarded up the windows, shoved furniture against the doors, did everything I could think of to keep it out. But it doesn't matter. The knocking isn't coming from outside anymore. It's coming from inside me. I can feel it under my skin, crawling, twisting, waiting. It's in my head, whispering things I can't understand but can't ignore. And the worst part, I don't think I'm alone. I think it's already taken Mia, and now it's taking me. And once it's done with us, it'll find someone else. Maybe it'll find you. As I write this, the knocking is getting louder. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely type, but I have to finish this. I have to warn you. If you hear the knocks, if you see the figure, don't let it in. Don't talk to it. Don't listen to it. Don't acknowledge it, because once you do, it's over. I don't think I have much time left. The walls are closing in, and the shadows are moving again. I can feel it watching me, waiting for me to stop fighting. And maybe I will. Maybe it's better this way. But if you're reading this and you've heard the knocks, please, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't play the game. Don't open the door. And whatever you do, don't let it in. The tapping just stopped. It's quiet now. Too quiet. I think it's here. Goodbye. My family played Ouija. After a Christmas dinner, the spirit said, "One of you isn't real." So here's the thing. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts, spirits, or any of that supernatural stuff. I'm the guy who'll binge watch horror movies with the lights off just to laugh at how ridiculous they are. But this was different. And it's been messing with my head ever since. I need to get this out somewhere. So here I am. Maybe someone here has an explanation. Or maybe it's just a warning to stay away from things you don't understand. It all started on Christmas night. My family has this tradition. Every year, after we eat dinner, we play some kind of game. Sometimes it's board games, sometimes trivia, It's always something harmless and cheesy. But this year, my cousin Emma decided to shake things up. She brought a Ouija board. Now, Emma is that one relative who's always into weird stuff. Crystals, tarot cards, manifesting vibes, whatever that means. So, when she pulled out the Ouija board, my mum immediately rolled her eyes. "Emma, do we really need to summon ghosts tonight?" she said, half joking. Emma just grinned. "Come on, it's Christmas. Let's talk to the spirits of our ancestors or something." At first, nobody took her seriously. My dad kept cracking jokes, my brother was too busy scrolling TikTok, and my grandma was already half asleep on the couch. But then my uncle, who'd had a little too much wine, got all into it. "Why not? Let's see if we can get Uncle Harry to tell us where he hid that secret whiskey stash," he said, laughing. I'll admit, I was curious. I mean, it's just a game, right? It's not like anything real was going to happen. So, a bunch of us sat down at the dining table. Me, Emma, my uncle, my mum, and my sister Katie. My dad stayed in the living room, saying he wasn't about to mess with bad juju, and my grandma just waved us off, muttering something about people inviting trouble. Emma set up the board like she'd done it a million times. She lit a candle for ambiance, she said, and placed the planchette in the middle of the board. The little plastic piece looked so cheap, like something you'd get at Walmart in the clearance section. I couldn't believe anyone took this stuff seriously. We all put our fingers on the planchette, and Emma started asking the usual questions. "Is there anyone here with us? Can you give us a sign?" At first, nothing happened. The planchette didn't budge, and my uncle started laughing again, saying we'd been ghost zoned. But then it moved. I know what you're thinking. One of us was probably pushing it. That's what I thought too. But I swear, I barely even touched the thing. I looked around the table, and everyone else seemed just as surprised. The planchette slowly slid to yes. That's when the mood shifted. You know that feeling you get when the power goes out at night? Like the air in the room gets heavier, and every sound seems louder than it should be. That's exactly what it felt like. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "What's your name?" she asked. The planchette spelled out E-L-L-I-S. "Ellis," Emma repeated, her eyes wide. "Who are you?" The planchette paused, then spelled out D-E-A-D. At this point, I was starting to get creeped out. My mum, who'd been quiet the whole time, pulled her hand away from the board. "All right, that's enough," she said firmly. "This isn't funny." But Emma wouldn't let it go. "Wait, Mom. Let's just ask one more question." My mum sighed, but didn't stop her. Emma leaned in closer to the board. "Ellis, do you have a message for us?" The planchette shot across the board, spelling out the words almost too fast for us to keep up. ONEOFYOUISNTREAL. I actually laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Nice one, Emma," I said. "You almost had me." But Emma shook her head. Her hands were shaking. "I'm not doing this," she whispered. Before anyone could say anything else, the candle flickered and went out. The room went completely dark, except for the glow of the Christmas tree lights in the corner. My uncle stood up so fast he knocked over his chair. "All right, this is stupid. We're done here." We all agreed, and Emma packed up the board, looking more rattled than I'd ever seen her. But the night didn't end there. After we cleaned up, everyone started heading to bed. My family lives in a pretty big house, so we all had our own rooms. I was staying in the guest room upstairs, and I remember feeling this weird sense of unease as I got ready for bed, like someone was watching me. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I figured it was my dad going to the bathroom or something, but when I looked at the door, I could see shadows under the crack. It wasn't just one person, it sounded like a bunch of people walking back and forth, almost pacing. I got up to check, but when I opened the door, the hallway was empty, completely silent. I stood there for a moment, my heart racing, before finally going back to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, things got even weirder. Over breakfast, Emma looked pale and tired, like she hadn't slept at all. My uncle was unusually quiet, and my mum kept glancing around like she was expecting something to jump out at her. Then Katie, my sister, dropped her fork and said, "Wait, where's Grandma?" We all froze. Grandma's room was downstairs, right off the living room. My dad went to check on her, but when he came back, he looked confused. "She's not there," he said. "Her bed hasn't even been touched." We searched the entire house, but there was no sign of her. Her coat, her purse, everything was still there. It was like she'd just vanished. That's when Emma said something that made my blood run cold. "What if she wasn't real?" We all stared at her like she'd lost her mind, but deep down, I knew she was thinking about the Ouija board, about what Ellis had said. "One of you isn't real." And that was just the beginning. After Grandma disappeared, the house felt wrong. You ever been somewhere that's so quiet it feels loud? That's how it was. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, it all sounded like a warning, like the house itself was holding its breath. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. The Ouija board. It had to be connected. I mean, what else could explain a grown woman vanishing into thin air? But here's the thing. None of us wanted to admit it. Instead, my dad tried to stay practical. "She probably just went for a walk early this morning," he said, pacing the kitchen with his hands on his hips. "You know how she gets sometimes. She's stubborn. Maybe she got lost." "Without her coat, without her purse," my mum snapped back. She was clutching her coffee mug so tight I thought it might shatter. "She wouldn't just leave like that." Emma was the only one brave, or stupid, enough to bring up the Ouija board. "What if Ellis took her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My dad slammed his hand on the counter. "Enough with that nonsense, Emma. It's a stupid game. You're scaring everyone." But here's the thing. Emma was already scared. We all were. And deep down, I think my dad was too. He just didn't want to show it. The rest of the day was a blur. We called the police, but they didn't take it seriously at first. "It hasn't even been 24 hours, the officer said over the phone. "She's an adult. She can leave if she wants to." But she didn't want to leave. She was Grandma, for God's sake. She practically lived in her recliner. The idea of her wandering off made no sense. By the time the sun set, things had only gotten worse. My uncle, who'd been trying to drink his way through the situation, started acting off. He kept muttering to himself, pacing around the house like he was looking for something but couldn't remember what it was. At one point, he stopped in the middle of the living room and said, "She's not gone. She's just hiding. They always hide first." "What are you talking about?" my mum asked, clearly fed up with his drunken ramblings. He turned to her, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "You don't hear it? The scratching." That's when I noticed it too. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound, like nails on wood. It was coming from the walls. I glanced at Emma, who looked like she was about to pass out, and then at my sister Katie, who was frozen in her seat. My dad brushed it off, saying it was probably mice or squirrels in the walls. But I wasn't so sure. The sound wasn't random. It had a rhythm to it. Like someone, or something, was trying to get our attention. That night, I couldn't sleep. None of us could, really. My room upstairs suddenly felt too big, too empty. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandma's face, her soft, wrinkled smile, and her habit of always humming Silent Night under her breath during Christmas. It didn't make sense. How could someone so ordinary just disappear? At around 2 a.m., I heard something. Not footsteps this time, but a whisper. Faint, almost like it was inside my head. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then it got louder. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a woman's voice. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The whisper was coming from the window. I don't know what possessed me to look. Maybe I thought it was Grandma, somehow trying to find her way back. But when I pulled back the curtain, I almost screamed. There was a shadow standing in the snow. It was shaped like a person, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the head tilted at an unnatural angle, and the way it stood, it wasn't just still, it was stiff, like it was frozen in place. Its face was turned up toward my window, but I couldn't make out any features, just a dark, empty void where a face should have been. I backed away from the window, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the floor. When I looked up again, it was gone. Just gone. No footprints in the snow. No sign it had ever been there. I wanted to scream, to wake everyone up, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe. Or maybe some part of me knew that whatever was out there, it wasn't going to stop at just watching. The next morning, things escalated. My uncle didn't come down for breakfast. At first, we thought he was just sleeping off his hangover. But when my dad went to check on him, he came back pale and shaking. "He's not there," he said. "What do you mean, not there?" my mum asked, already panicking. "His room, it's empty, completely empty, like he was never here." We all rushed upstairs to check, and my dad wasn't kidding. The bed was made, the suitcase he'd brought was gone, and there was no sign he'd ever stayed in the room. The only thing left was his wallet, sitting on the nightstand, untouched. My mum started crying, and Emma just kept whispering, "This isn't happening. This isn't happening." By this point, we were all terrified. My dad called the police again, and this time they took it seriously. They sent an officer over to take a statement, but even he seemed uneasy. He kept glancing around the house like he was expecting something to jump out at him. While the officer was talking to my parents, Emma pulled me aside. "We need to go back to the board," she said. "Are you insane?" I hissed. "That thing's what started all this." She shook her head. "We don't have a choice. It's the only way to figure out what's going on." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We waited until the officer left and everyone else was distracted, then snuck up to Emma's room where she'd stashed the Ouija board. This time, it felt different. The moment we touched the planchette, the air in the room got colder. Emma didn't even have to ask a question. The planchette started moving on its own. WHOISNTREAL. My blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" I whispered. The planchette moved again, faster this time. THEONEWHOSTAYSNTREAL. "What the hell does that mean?" Emma shouted. "Who stays? Who isn't real?" The candle flickered, and the board spelled out one final word. YOU. I felt the blood drain from my face as Emma stared at me, her eyes wide with terror. Before either of us could say anything, the planchette shot off the board, landing on the floor with a loud clatter. Then we heard it. The scratching sound again, but this time it was louder, more frantic. It wasn't coming from the walls anymore, it was coming from inside the room. When that scratching started coming from inside the room, Emma and I froze. You know that kind of fear that paralyzes you, where your body feels like it's stuck in place, but your mind is screaming at you to move. That's what it felt like. I couldn't even breathe. The sound wasn't just scratching anymore. It was frantic, like claws raking against wood. Whatever was making that noise wasn't trying to get out. It was trying to get in. Emma grabbed my arm so hard I thought she might break it. "We need to go," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I realized she was crying. "We need to get out of this house." But I couldn't move. My eyes were glued to the floor, to the spot where the sound was coming from. It wasn't random. The noise was coming in bursts, like Morse code or something. A pattern. Scratch, 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 scratch. And then it stopped. Just silence. For a second I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but then I saw it. The floorboards, they were bulging, lifting slightly like someone or something was pushing up from underneath. "Get out!" Emma screamed, yanking me toward the door. But just as we turned to run, the lights went out. Complete darkness. The only light came from the moon outside, filtering through the window, casting these long, distorted shadows across the room. For a second, I thought I saw something in the corner, a shape, hunched over, watching us. I grabbed Emma's hand, and we bolted down the hall, tripping over each other in the dark. The house felt different, bigger somehow, like the hallways had stretched. The walls seemed closer, pressing in on us. And the smell, God, the smell. It was like something rotting, something that had been dead for a long time, but didn't know it yet. We made it downstairs, and that's when we heard the front door slam. My mom and dad were standing in the living room, pale and wide-eyed. My sister Katie was clutching a blanket, her face buried in my mom's side. "What the hell is going on?" my dad demanded. His voice was shaking, which scared me more than anything else. My dad never gets scared. Before I could answer, Katie spoke up, her voice muffled. "There was someone outside," she said, "by the tree." "What are you talking about?" I asked. She pointed toward the big oak tree in the front yard. "There was a man standing there. He was smiling at me." My stomach dropped. "What did he look like?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She shook her head. "I couldn't see his face, it was too dark. But he was tall, and he didn't move. He just stared." That's when the banging started. It was loud, like fists pounding against the front door. My dad grabbed the fire poker from the fireplace and inched toward the door. But when he opened it, no one was there. Just the empty porch and the snow, untouched. No footprints. He slammed the door shut and locked it, turning to us with this look in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. "Everyone stay together," he said. "Nobody leaves this room." We huddled in the living room, my mum trying to distract Katie by turning on Netflix. But the Wi-Fi wasn't working. Neither were our phones. No signal, no internet, just static. Emma sat next to me, clutching the Ouija board like it was some kind of shield. "It's not over," she whispered. "Ellis isn't done with us." I wanted to tell her to shut up, to stop making things worse, but deep down, I knew she was right. Whatever we'd brought into this house, it wasn't going to leave until it got what it wanted. At around midnight, my dad decided to check on the basement. He thought maybe the power outage was from a blown fuse. I told him it was a bad idea, but he wouldn't listen. "We can't just sit here in the dark," he said. "I'll be back in 5 minutes." He grabbed a flashlight and headed downstairs, leaving the rest of us in the living room. The second he was out of sight, the air in the room changed. It felt heavier, thicker, like we were underwater. Emma started fidgeting, her fingers tracing the edges of the Ouija board. "What are you doing?" I hissed. "We need answers," she said. "We need to know what Ellis wants." "Are you insane?" "After everything that's happened." But before I could finish, we heard it. A scream. My dad's scream, echoing up from the basement. My mum jumped to her feet, shouting his name, but he didn't answer. The flashlight he'd been holding clattered onto the basement steps, rolling into view. Then came the sound. Wet, heavy footsteps, slowly climbing the stairs. My mum froze, her eyes glued to the basement door. "Mark," she whispered. "Is that you?" The door creaked open, but it wasn't my dad. It wasn't anyone. The stairs were empty, but the footsteps didn't stop. They moved into the living room, circling us, even though there was no one there. Katie started crying, burying her face in my mum's chest. Emma dropped the Ouija board, her face pale as a sheet. "We need to leave," she said, her voice barely audible. But before we could move, the scratching started again. This time it was coming from the ceiling. We all looked up at once, and that's when we saw it. The chandelier. It was swaying, even though there was no wind, no movement in the room. And hanging from it was something that shouldn't have been possible. My dad. His body was tied up with Christmas lights, his head tilted at that same unnatural angle I'd seen in the shadow outside my window. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking at us. They were looking past us, like he could see something we couldn't. My mum screamed, grabbing Katie and pulling her toward the door. But the door wouldn't budge. No matter how hard we pulled, it stayed shut, like it had been sealed from the outside. That's when Emma lost it. She grabbed the Ouija board and slammed it onto the coffee table. "What do you want?" she screamed, slamming her hands onto the planchette. "Tell us what you want!" The planchette started moving on its own, faster than it ever had before. The letters blurred together, but the message was clear. ONEOFYOUMUSTSTAY. "What does that mean?" my mum sobbed. Stay where?" The planchette moved again, spelling out one final word, HERE. The lights flickered and the room went cold. My dad's body was gone, the chandelier empty, but the sense of dread was still there, heavier than ever. Emma turned to me, her face pale and tear-streaked. "It's you," she whispered. "You're the one." Before I could respond, the scratching started again, louder this time. It wasn't coming from the ceiling or the walls anymore. It was coming from inside me. The scratching inside me was unbearable. It was faint at first, like nails dragging along the inside of my ribs, but it quickly grew louder, sharper. I clutched my chest, doubling over on the floor. I could feel something moving under my skin, like insects crawling just beneath the surface. The others stared at me, frozen in terror. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. "Get it out!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Get it out of me!" Emma knelt next to me, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. Her eyes were wide, full of tears. "It's Ellis," she whispered. "He's inside you." "What does that mean?" I shouted back, gripping her wrist like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. "How the hell is he inside me?" Before she could answer, the room went pitch black again. This wasn't like the lights going out before. This was different. It was the kind of darkness that felt alive, wrapping itself around you, pressing in on all sides. I could hear my mum crying, Katie whispering prayers under her breath. But then, the sound came. A clock. Tick, tick, tick. It was slow, deliberate, like the ticking of an old grandfather clock. But there was no clock in the house. The sound was coming from nowhere and everywhere all at once. I could feel it vibrating in my skull, each tick rattling my teeth. And then I saw it, a faint, glowing outline in the darkness. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, but no, it was real. A figure, standing in the corner of the room, watching us. It was the same shape I'd seen outside my window the night before. Tall, unnaturally thin, its head tilted at that impossible angle. It stepped closer, and as it did, the ticking grew louder. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, locked in place as the figure stopped just a few feet away from me. Its head tilted further, and for the first time, I saw its face, or what was left of it. It didn't have eyes, just empty, gaping sockets, blacker than the darkness around it. Its mouth was stretched into this horrible grin, the kind that didn't belong on a human face. And its teeth. God, its teeth. They were jagged, broken, like shards of glass sticking out of its gums. It leaned down, its face inches from mine, and whispered in a voice that didn't sound like it came from this world. "Time's running out." The lights flickered back on, and the figure was gone, but the damage was already done. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like something was clawing its way out. I ripped open my shirt, and that's when I saw them. Scratches. Deep red lines carved into my skin, spelling out a single word. Stay. Emma stumbled back, her hand over her mouth. "It's you," she said again, her voice trembling. "Ellis chose you." "What the hell does that mean?" I shouted, panic bubbling in my throat. "What does he want from me?" But she didn't answer. She didn't need to. The Ouija board, still sitting on the coffee table, started moving on its own. The planchette skidded across the board, faster than I thought was possible, spelling out the answer in jagged, uneven letters. YOUMUSTSTAYTOLIVE. The room exploded into chaos. My mum was screaming, my sister was crying, and my dad's absence hung over us like a ghost. Emma grabbed the board and threw it across the room, but it didn't stop. The planchette kept moving, sliding across the floor, carving words into the hardwood as it went. "One of you must stay." That's when the front door unlocked. We all heard it, an unmistakable click like the bolt sliding open. My mum grabbed Katie and bolted toward the door, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I knew what it meant. The door wasn't opening to let us out. It was opening to let it in. Emma grabbed my arm, shaking me. "We have to go! Now!" But I couldn't leave. I didn't know how I knew, but I just knew. If I left, we'd all die. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't paranoia. It was fact. The air in the room was thick with it, this undeniable truth pressing down on me like a weight. I looked at Emma, tears streaming down my face. "I can't," I said. "If I leave, it'll follow us. It'll kill all of you." "Don't be stupid," she shouted. "We'll figure it out, but you can't just stay here with that thing." But I didn't have a choice. The scratches on my chest were burning now, the pain searing, like they were branding me. I could feel Ellis inside me, clawing his way deeper, anchoring himself to me. "Go," I whispered. "Take Mum and Katie and get out of here." Emma shook her head, her grip tightening. "I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice," I said, my voice breaking. "If you stay, you'll die. All of you will." She stared at me, her face crumpling, before finally letting go. She grabbed Katie and my mum, dragging them toward the door. They didn't want to leave, but I forced them. I shoved them out onto the porch, slamming the door shut behind them. And then, I was alone. The house was silent now, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it. Ellis. He was everywhere. In the walls, the floors, the air. The ticking sound started again, louder this time, more erratic. I sat down in the middle of the living room, staring at the Ouija board. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The planchette didn't move this time. Instead, the scratches on my chest began to bleed, the letters shifting, rearranging themselves into a new message. "You are home." I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me. This wasn't about staying in the house. It was about becoming part of it. I wasn't just supposed to live here. I was supposed to be here. Forever. The scratching inside me started again, stronger now. I could feel it moving up my throat, clawing its way out. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body convulsed, my vision blurring. And then, nothing. When I woke up, everything was different. The room was still, the air heavy. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My body felt wrong, stiff, like I was made of stone. I looked down at my hands and realized they weren't my hands anymore. They were wood. The walls around me groaned, and I understood. I wasn't me anymore. I was part of the house. The scratching, the noises, the shadows, they weren't Ellis. They were the ones who came before me, the ones who stayed. And now, I'm one of them. If you ever find yourself in a house that feels too quiet, too cold, get out. Don't touch the Ouija board. Don't ask questions. And whatever you do, don't stay. The worst part about becoming part of the house wasn't the transformation itself. It wasn't the pain or the horror of watching my body harden into something unnatural. It wasn't even the realization that I was no longer me. The worst part was the silence. Not the kind of silence you notice when you're alone, like the absence of noise. This was a living, breathing silence. It had weight. It pressed down on me, coiling around my thoughts, choking them out one by one. It was the silence of knowing that no one was coming back for me, the silence of being forgotten. But I wasn't alone. Not really. I could feel them. The others, the ones who came before me. Their presence was everywhere. In the creak of the stairs, in the whispers that drifted through the walls late at night. They weren't ghosts, not exactly. They were something worse. Fragments, leftovers of the people they used to be, trapped in the house like insects caught in amber. I don't know how long I stayed like that, aware but unable to move. Hours, days. Time didn't mean anything anymore. All I knew was the scratching. It never stopped. It wasn't coming from me anymore. But it was there, always, in the walls, in the floorboards, in the back of my mind. I started to understand the pattern, the rhythm of it. It wasn't random. It was a message. Then the door opened. I didn't see it happen, but I felt it. The rush of cold air, the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. Someone was here, a family. I could hear their voices, muffled, but clear enough to make out. A man, a woman, a little girl, laughing, talking about how much they loved the charm of the house. No, 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 no. They shouldn't be here. I wanted to scream, to warn them, but I couldn't. My voice was gone. My body was gone. All I could do was listen as they moved through the house, their excitement growing with every room they explored. "Look at this fireplace," the man said. "It's beautiful." "I love the old wooden beams," the woman added. "It's so cozy." Cozy. That word made my blood, or whatever was left of it, run cold. The house wanted them to feel cozy. It wanted them to stay. The little girl giggled, her footsteps light as she ran down the hallway. "Mommy, there's a secret door," she shouted. My stomach, or whatever was left of it, dropped. A secret door. I didn't even know there was one, but the house did. It was showing her, luring her in. "Ellie, don't run off," the woman called, but the girl didn't listen. I could hear her footsteps echoing down the hall, closer and closer to the hidden room. They found it eventually. The whole family. The door was small, almost invisible, tucked into the corner of the dining room. The man had to crouch to open it, and when he did, I felt the shift. The house was awake now, fully awake. The air grew heavier, colder, as they peered inside. "What's in there?" the woman asked. "Looks like a basement," the man replied. His voice echoed as he stepped inside. "This is so cool. I didn't even know this place had a basement." It didn't. Not before they came. The house was changing, adapting, creating what it needed to keep them here. I wanted to warn them, to do something, but I couldn't. All I could do was watch. No, feel, as they descended the stairs, their footsteps growing fainter with each step. The little girl was the last to go down. She paused at the top of the stairs, her tiny hand resting on the banister. For a moment, I thought maybe she felt it too, the wrongness of the place. But then she smiled. "It smells funny," she said, her voice echoing down the dark stairwell. "Like Grandma." The basement wasn't a basement. It was something else entirely. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like the house's guts had been turned inside out, all jagged beams and exposed nails, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. The walls weren't walls. They were flesh, breathing, watching. And in the center of the room, there was a table. A long wooden table surrounded by chairs that didn't match. It looked like something out of a bad dream, the kind where everything feels familiar but wrong. The man and woman stood frozen, staring at the table. The little girl walked right up to it. "Ellie, don't!" the woman shouted, but it was too late. The girl reached out, her small fingers brushing against the wood. That's when they saw me. I was the table, or, at least, I was part of it. My face was there, carved into the wood, my mouth frozen in a silent scream. My hands were fused to the surface, stretched and warped, my fingers twisted into grotesque shapes. I could see them staring at me, their faces pale with horror, but I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch. The little girl tilted her head, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Who is it?" she asked. The man grabbed her, pulling her back. "We're leaving," he said, his voice shaking. "We're getting out of here." But the house had other plans. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place. The walls groaned, shifting, closing in. The scratching started again, louder this time, more frantic. The man pounded on the door, shouting for someone to let them out, but it was useless. They were already part of the house. The woman started screaming, clawing at the walls as the little girl began to cry. The man turned to me, or what was left of me, his eyes wild with desperation. "What do we do?" he shouted. "How do we get out?" I wanted to help him. God, I wanted to help them so badly. But there was nothing I could do. The house had them now, just like it had me. All I could do was watch as the walls closed in, swallowing them whole. The silence returned, heavier than ever. The house was still again, content, for now. I don't know how much time passed before the door opened again, letting in a new family. A young couple this time, holding hands and talking about how much they loved the character of the place. I tried to warn them, to scream, to do anything, but it was useless. I wasn't me anymore. I was the house, and the house never lets anyone leave.